In April 1908, LaPorte, Indiana police would investigate a fire that had burned Norwegian immigrant Belle Gunness's farmhouse to the ground. In the ruins, they found the bodies of 3 deceased children, as well as a headless adult woman, initially identified as Belle Gunness herself. However, as shocking as that discovery was, since fires don't often decapitate people, after further investigation, the police would discover that the 3 children were also poisoned, and that there were at least 11 additional bodies buried on the Gunness property. This is the very weird mystery of one of the most prolific serial killers that you've probably never heard about. Discretion advised, sources in the description. Belle Gunness, otherwise known as Hell's Belle, was born as Brynhild Polsdatter Storseth in Norway on November 11, 1859. At age 14, Brynhild began working for neighboring farms by milking and herding cattle, so she could save up enough money to move over to the United States. She then moved to New York in 1881. When she was processed by immigration at Castle Garden in Manhattan, Brynhild changed her first name to Belle. She then traveled to Chicago to join her sister Nellie, who had immigrated several years earlier. While in Chicago and living with her sister and brother-in-law, Belle started working as a domestic servant, and then got a job at a butcher shop cutting up animal carcasses. Now, she was said to have been at least about 5 foot 7 inches tall and weighed somewhere between 210 and 250 pounds. She was also physically strong in appearance, and judging by the photos of her, she does appear to be a woman that would be able to beat the shit out of just about anybody, and that's pretty much what she did in this story. Now, in 1884, after living with her sister for 3 years, Belle then marries a guy named Mads Sorensen, and the couple would open a candy store together, which mysteriously caught fire one day and burned to the ground. Yeah, you're gonna start noticing a pattern here soon. Now, pretty soon after this fire, their home also caught fire and burned to the ground, and both incidents would grant the couple big insurance payouts. Now, Belle was adamant to prove that she wasn't only trying to collect insurance payouts from fires, because she collected 2 more insurance payouts after 2 babies in her home died from inflammation of the large intestine. Belle had insured both of the children and collected a large insurance check after each death. Apparently, her neighbors were suspicious about where she even got the babies from, because Belle never appeared to be pregnant. Then, Belle's husband Mads purchased 2 life insurance policies for himself, and they may as well have been death policies, because on July 30th, 1900, when one policy was about to expire, Mads Sorensen mysteriously died of a cerebral hemorrhage. Belle just told the police that he had come home with a headache and she had gave him some quinine powder for the pain. When she later checked on him, he was dead. Belle then collected $5,000 from both of his life insurance policies, and with the insurance money, she moved to LaPorte, Indiana, and bought a pig farm to live with her kind again. Was that a bit rude? Well, fuck her, she killed at least 15 people. Moving on. Pretty soon after this, Belle then married a guy named Peter Gunness on April 1st, 1902. Within the next week, while Peter was out of the house, his infant daughter mysteriously died of unknown causes while in Belle's care. Peter Gunness himself would die about 8 months later due to a skull injury. Belle just told police that this time, Peter reached for something up on a high shelf and a meat grinder fell on his head. Well, the district coroner thought that sounded like a bunch of bullshit, and he convened with a coroner's jury, suspecting murder, but somehow nothing came of this case. Belle then collected the $3,000 insurance payout for Peter's death. Then, about 2 to 3 years later in 1905, Belle must have started to get bored or something, and probably wanted to collect more life insurance payouts, so she started to put marriage ads in the Chicago newspapers. These ads said, quote, "Seeking male suitors. Personal, comely widow who owns a large farm in one of the finest districts in LaPorte County, Indiana, desires to make the acquaintance of gentlemen equally well provided, with view of joining fortunes. No replies by letter considered, unless sender is willing to follow answer with personal visit. Triflers need not apply." One of her ads was answered by a Wisconsin farmhand named Henry Gerhold. After traveling to LaPorte, Gerhold wrote to his family, saying that he liked the farm, was in good health, and asked them to send him seed potatoes. When the family failed to hear back from him after that, they contacted Belle Gunness, and Belle just told them that Henry had gone off with some horse traders to Chicago. Now, it's unclear if they ever asked Belle again about Henry, but then in 1906, a guy named John Moe from Minnesota, answered another one of Belle's ads. After they corresponded for several months, Moe traveled to LaPorte and withdrew a large amount of his money. Although no one ever saw Moe again, a carpenter who did occasional work at Belle's farm found Moe's trunk was still in Belle's house, along with more than a dozen others. How she got away with this for so long is a fucking mystery. Yeah, anyway, in another letter that seems to have been recovered, Belle replied to a guy named Carl Peterson of Wisconsin, who had written to Belle after seeing one of her ads in the newspaper, and she said, quote, "I have picked out the most respectable, and I have decided that yours is such." She then goes on to describe her LaPorte farm as picturesque and almost a utopia, yet in need of a man to share in the labor. Now, if you think that you are able in some way to put up $1,000 cash, we can talk matters over personally, end quote. Now, this happened to at least 11 men between 1905 and 1908, but one man in particular was a guy by the name of Andrew Helgelin. Apparently, after he vanished, his brother Asla found the correspondence between Andrew and Belle, with Belle asking Andrew to relocate to LaPorte, to bring money, and to keep the move a secret. Asla then contacted Belle, asking her, "What the fuck is this?" I'm not sure how she tried to talk her way out of this one, but Asla didn't buy her bullshit, and he warned her that he's coming to the farm to look for his brother. In a shocking twist, this is when the fire burnt Belle Gunness's farmhouse to the ground in April 1908. The LaPorte police went out to inspect the ruins, and they found the bodies of Belle's 3 children, who, like I mentioned already, were also all poisoned, and they also found a decapitated adult woman, which they presumed was Belle Gunness. The newspapers immediately printed a story about a praiseworthy woman dying in the fire that consumed her house in a desperate attempt to save her children. However, Asla Helgelin knew better, and he contacted the LaPorte police, and he told them about the weird letters between his brother and Belle. Then Asla, the police, and a former hired hand that worked at Belle's farm went to inspect the ruins once again, and the former hired hand pointed out something weird, these sort of soft depressions that were in a pen for the hogs, and after they dug into one of these depressions, they found a gunny sack that contained 2 hands, 2 feet, and 1 head, which Asla immediately recognized as his brother Andrew. When the police inspected the rest of the farm, they found dozens of these soft depressions, and after digging in them, they found even more gunny sacks containing torsos, hands, arms, and masses of human bone wrapped in loose flesh that dripped like jelly. Damn. Yeah, that was a bit much, I'm sorry. In each case, the body had been butchered the same way. The body decapitated, the arms removed at the shoulders, and the legs severed at the knees. Evidence of blunt force trauma was also found on the skulls that were scattered around the farm. Now, after finding the dismembered parts of at least 5 different bodies on the first day, an additional 6 were found on the second. It is said that at this point, the police stopped counting. Why on earth they did that, I have no idea. Probably because they ran out of fingers on their hands to count with. But after finding all of these bodies, the perception of Belle Gunness, as reported by the newspaper, as this praiseworthy woman who died in a fire that consumed her house in a desperate attempt to save her children, was reassessed, because obviously there was something wrong with her. And now, since the correspondence from Belle always asked the men who came there to keep the move a secret, most of the remains on her farm could not be identified, with just the exception of a couple of them, like Andrew Helgelin, for example. Now, of course, the big mystery here, other than how the hell did she get away with this for so long, is who decapitated Belle Gunness? Well, that is where things get a little stranger, because pretty soon after beginning their investigation, police found out that Belle visited her attorney to establish a will, and while she was in his office, she started crying and telling him that she feared that she did not have long to live. The very next day is the day that her farmhouse burned to the ground. Now, in November 1908, a guy named Ray Lamphere was convicted of arson in connection with the fire at Belle's house. Ray was actually one of Belle's hired hands, an on and off again lover. Apparently, this guy was so in love with Belle that he was willing to do just about anything for her, including killing for her and liking her. But he also apparently repeatedly threatened her after she rejected him. Ray then later confessed to police that Belle had been placing these ads in the newspaper seeking male companionship, only to murder and rob the men who responded. Ray then also stated that Belle had asked him to burn down the farmhouse with her children inside. He also claimed that the body thought to be Belle's was in fact another one of her victims, chosen and planted to mislead investigators. Ray says that when Asli Helgelin warned Belle that he was going to come to the farm to find his brother, Belle told Ray to destroy her house and that she was going to fake her death and get the hell out of there. Interestingly though, when Ray was arrested, he was wearing John Moe's overcoat and Henry Gerald's watch. However, Ray would go on to confuse investigators with conflicting stories, claiming to know about many more of Belle's victims and also making a statement that he felt certain the body in the fire was actually hers. Even more confusing is that Ray had an alibi witness for the time when some neighbors already spotted the fire burning, so it seemed unlikely that he actually started it. Either way, he was sentenced to 2 to 21 years in prison, where he later died of tuberculosis. Belle Gunness was then pronounced dead, even though the doctor who performed the autopsy testified that the body was 5 inches shorter than her and about 50 pounds lighter. No explanation was ever provided for what actually happened to the body's head. Now, only 2 things here could have happened. She either successfully faked her death and got away, or she died in the fire. And since the doctor was pretty sure that it wasn't actually her body, it seems pretty likely that she got away with it. So, then where did she go? Nobody knows. But from 1908 to 1931, she was allegedly sighted numerous times around the country by people who knew her, but she always managed to slip away. Then in 1931 in Los Angeles, an elderly woman named Esther Carlson was charged with killing a man for money. But before her trial started, she died. 2 people who had known Belle recognized this photo of Esther Carlson in the newspaper as Belle Gunness. Some accounts also claim that the police found a trunk in a room where this Esther Carlson woman was staying, and inside this trunk was a photograph of 3 children, and these 3 children allegedly resembled Belle Gunness's 3 children. Yeah, the ones that she burnt in a fire. Now I tried to find some more information on Esther Carlson, and I found an article written by Cynthia Boatwright Raleigh on a website called Genealogy Storytelling. The website is linked in the description. Now what Cynthia has managed to find is very interesting. Now this murder that Esther Carlson was accused of in 1931 was actually orchestrated by her and her neighbor, and they poisoned a wealthy retired Chicago lumber magnate named Carl August Lindstrom. Now when Esther was arrested, she told police that she was born in 1869 in Sweden, rather than 1859 in Norway as Belle would have been. She also told police that she was 15 years old when she moved over to America, but then she later told them that she was actually 25 when she moved. Now this 10-year difference is what police felt was actually a slip-up, and that would be the first of many slip-ups. Esther also said that her maiden name was Johnson, and that she'd married her first husband Charles Carlson in California. However, her 1911 marriage certificate said that they got married in Arizona. Charles Carlson, which I'll admit I thought was a made-up name, was actually from Arizona and had lived there almost all of his life. Also, Esther's maiden name on the marriage certificate was listed as Hansen, not Johnson. These are pretty difficult mistakes to make, so when Esther was asked about this, she explained that she married her first husband Charles Hansen in Connecticut, but then he drowned a few months later. That sounds very familiar. She then lived in California for a while and then moved over to Arizona. Now, Cynthia says that she found a newspaper article from July 1908, which described how 2 weeks after he started a new job in Hartford, Charles Hansen was found dead in or snagged on a tree overhanging the Connecticut River in Agawam, Massachusetts, which was several miles upstream from Hartford. Police didn't know how he came to be in that area and reported that neither his cause of death nor how he got into the tree was apparent. In December 1908, the police concluded that Charles took his own life. Now, that's strange for the reason that we know Belle Gunness went through husbands like a fat kid through a donut shop. So it's not a surprise to hear that Charles II was also dead, and he died in 1925 of an ill-defined malady. I had to Google what that means. It just means ailment. Now, there was another person living inside the house as well at the time, an elderly man named Gustav Elsen, who also died in Esther's care. Now, after Charles number 2 died, Esther started working for August Lindstrom as his live-in housekeeper. Lindstrom had actually been a longtime friend of Esther's second husband Charles, going all the way back to when he owned a saloon in Arizona, and it seems that Lindstrom offered Esther this job after Charles died. Then on February 9th, 1931, August Lindstrom suddenly and mysteriously died. One of August's sons, named Peter, came to California from Chicago to find out what happened. He and his brother, also named Charles, had been in regular contact with August and knew him to be in quite good health, even though he was 81 years old. Peter Lindstrom was shocked when he received a curt telegram from Esther informing him, quote, "Your father died this evening at 7:30 p.m. No further explanation was provided, not even a "so sorry for your loss" or anything. Now, rumors of murder immediately began to swirl around, and Peter Lindstrom started doing his own investigation, including arranging an exhumation with subsequent autopsy at his own expense. A finding was returned of arsenic poisoning, and reportedly a massive dose, some of which was still inside Lindstrom's stomach. Police then received a phone tip that raised questions about Esther's identity. The caller told police that they knew Belle Gunness, and that Esther Carlson was not only similar to Belle in appearance, but also in MO as well, with all the husbands dying. What made this theory even more compelling is that Esther somehow arranged to be a joint account holder with August Lindstrom at the California Bank in Lomita for an account with a balance of $2,000. Even more suspicious is that all of the money was withdrawn within a day or two following Lindstrom's death. Even more suspicious was that a dubious will dated after the official will was found in a bureau drawer, stating that August Lindstrom was leaving all of his property and money to Esther Carlson. She had no chill. Esther and her neighbor Anna Erickson were quickly arrested and jointly charged with murder by poisoning. Esther then spent much of her time awaiting trial in the jail infirmary, and then she died of tuberculosis before the trial began, thereby escaping prosecution. Anna then went to trial alone, and she was acquitted. Now, it's never been proven that Esther Carlson was actually Belle Gunness. However, it does sound like she could have been. Anyway, in 2008, DNA tests were performed on the body that was found at Belle's farm in an attempt to compare the DNA against a sample from a letter Belle had sent one of her victims. But due to the age of the sample, the test was inconclusive, and whether Belle Gunness died in the farmhouse fire or escaped and changed her name to Esther Carlson still remains unsolved.